Hi friends. Please subscribe and help me reach my first 1,000 subscribers. Thank you. I hope you enjoy this story. Let us go. James sat in his corner office overlooking the gray steel-tinted skyline of Boston, wrapping both hands around his coffee mug for warmth. He took a bite of a homemade cranberry scone, part of a care package his grandmother had overnight from Vermont. He was not in any rush to go back to his condo in the South End. The place felt like a vacuum now, a hollow shell where memories of Jessica still seemed to scream from every corner. She had not just packed up her clothes and left, she had taken a piece of his identity with her. He glanced at his computer screen, where a LinkedIn profile glowed in blue and white, Robert Rivers. James had connected the dots a long time ago. Robert was not just a former college classmate of his ex-wife, he was the guy she had left him for. James scrolled through the photos, his jaw tightening. There were pictures of Robert and his wife Sarah, looking like the poster couple for marital bliss on a ski trip to Vermont and a summer getaway in Cape Cod. It's amazing how easy it is for people to fake it, James thought, a bitter smirk tugging at the corner of his mouth. He did not know exactly what was driving him right now, anger, wounded pride, or something darker, but he had made a decision. Robert was going to pay for the wreckage he caused. Just yesterday, James had spotted Sarah walking into the lobby of their shared office building in the financial district. Her smile had seemed so genuine, so warm, and in that split second, the plan had clicked into place. She was the key to his retribution. The next morning, James deliberately lingered in the building's main lobby, pretending to be engrossed in an urgent email on his iPhone. He had timed it perfectly, he knew Sarah's schedule. And then there she was, petite, moving with an effortless grace, her long chestnut hair cascading over the collar of her wool coat. She flashed a polite smile at the security guard and adjusted her scarf against the draft from the revolving doors. "Good morning," James said, stepping into her path smoothly but not aggressively. Sarah looked up, slightly startled, her eyes widening. "Good morning," she replied, pausing to look at him with polite curiosity. "I am James Wilson," he introduced himself, extending a hand. "We seem to share an elevator about 3 times a week, and I realized I've never actually introduced myself. Figured it was overdue." "Sarah Rivers," she responded, shaking his hand. Her grip was firm, and her fingers were surprisingly warm despite the biting New England chill outside. "Nice to officially meet you, James. I am up on the 17th floor," he added, keeping his tone casual and easygoing. "Asset management." "What about you?" 15th, Sarah answered. "I am in client relations." "I hope I did not derail your morning routine." "Not at all," she smiled, a slight flush appearing on her cheeks. James decided not to push his luck. He checked his Apple Watch. "Well, I will not keep you. But hey, if you ever need someone to make sense of the 401k options or just crunch some numbers, you know where to find me." He gave a casual wave and headed toward the elevator bank, leaving her looking pleasantly surprised. That evening, he scrolled through her Instagram again. A few generic posts, a couple of photos with Robert at a Red Sox game, but nothing that screamed marital crisis. They looked solid. However, a few days later, James spotted an opening. He walked into the building's cafeteria during the lunch rush and saw Sarah sitting alone at a small table by the window, staring blankly at the slushy streets below. He seized the moment. "Mind if I crash your table?" he asked, holding his tray. Sarah looked up, and a shadow of relief crossed her face. "Please go ahead." "Rough day?" he asked gently, sliding into the chair opposite her. "No, just tired," she sighed, shrugging slightly. James knew the unwritten rules of corporate engagement, do not pry, but he decided to offer an opening anyway. "You know," he said, keeping his voice friendly and low, "sometimes venting to a total stranger is cheaper than therapy. And I am told I am a pretty good listener." Sarah hesitated for a moment, pushing a piece of lettuce around her salad bowl, then let out a quiet breath. "Honestly? Sometimes I feel like I am living with a stranger." James feigned surprise, though his pulse quickened. He leaned in slightly. "You mean, your husband?" "Yes," she replied, dropping her gaze. "We've been together 7 years, but for the last year, S checked out. He's just not there." She spoke so quietly it was almost a whisper, and James felt the first thread of a connection forming between them. "That's heavy," he said, his tone empathetic. but you do not strike me as the type of person who throws in the towel without a fight. Sarah managed a weak smile. Thanks, James. That is probably the nicest thing anyone has said to me in months. Over the next few weeks, their lunches became a routine. James played the role of the supportive confidant perfectly, listening to her worries while she remained oblivious to his ulterior motives. One afternoon, while they were taking a walk through the public garden during their lunch break, Sarah suddenly stopped near the frozen pond. You know, James, I used to think Robert and I had this perfect marriage. The kind you see in movies, she said, her voice trembling. Now I am terrified he is cheating on me. The words hung in the cold air. What makes you think that? James asked, masking his excitement with concern. He's coming home late constantly. Project deadlines, client dinners. There is always an excuse, she said, her voice cracking. And yesterday, I saw a notification pop up on his phone. It just felt off. James saw the tears welling up in her eyes. His instinct was to pull her into a hug, but he held back, instead reaching out to give her hand a reassuring squeeze. Sarah, listen to me. You deserve the truth. If he is betraying you, you need to know. You see, not live in limbo. She nodded, wiping a tear from her cheek with her gloved hand. Thank you, James. You're the only person I can talk to about this. Everyone else thinks we're the golden couple. In that moment, James felt a hairline fracture in his plan. He was actually starting to care about her well-being. But the hunger for revenge was still gnawing at his gut, demanding to be fed. I have to expose Robert, he told himself. I need to destroy him to give Sarah a chance at a real life. A week later, James was sitting in his minimalist condo, the blue light of his MacBook illuminating his face. He had pulled up a dossier on Robert Rivers. The man was his target, his nemesis. But now, after weeks of seeing Sarah's pain up close, the lines were blurring. His revenge plot did not feel as surgical as it had in the beginning. He was watching her break, and the urge to protect her was starting to conflict with the urge to use her. The buzz of his intercom startled him. He checked the camera feed. It was Sarah. He buzzed her up and opened his door as she stepped off the elevator. James, she said, offering a tentative smile. She was holding 2 Starbucks cups in a cardboard carrier. Sarah? How did you know where I live? Oh God, I promise I am not a stalker, she said, looking instantly guilty. I may have peeked at the department directory when the admin was not looking. I hope you do not mind. She lifted the coffee. I figured you might be working late, and I needed to get out of my house. I brought a peace offering. James froze for a second, then stepped aside, gesturing for her to enter. Of course, come in. It's a surprise, but a good one. She set the coffee on his granite island and looked around. The apartment was spotless, modern, and undeniably masculine. I did not expect this, she noted with a faint smile. Usually, guys' apartments are a mix of pizza boxes and sad houseplants. This is like a showroom. I am a bit OCD about organization, he admitted, pulling out a bar stool for her. Consider yourself warned. Sarah chuckled, but the sound died in her throat almost instantly. James, I need to talk. The shift in her tone put him on high alert. Okay. What happened? She stared down at the coffee cup, her fingers nervously picking at the cardboard sleeve. I tried to talk to Robert last night. I asked him point blank if he was seeing someone else. James felt his stomach tighten. And what did he say? He laughed at me, Sarah said, her voice shaking with humiliation. He literally laughed. He told me I was losing my mind, that I had too much free time, and was imagining things. Then he grabbed his keys and stormed out. James watched her for a long moment, debating whether to drop the bomb now. He knew exactly what Robert was doing. Sarah, he started carefully. Maybe it's time to stop asking and start looking. You need proof. She nodded slowly. I've thought about it. But I am scared. What if I find something I see not unsee? It's better to know the truth and hurt for a while than to live a lie forever, he said firmly. Her eyes met his, shimmering with unshed tears and gratitude. You're probably right. The next day, they met for lunch at a quiet bistro a few blocks from the office. This time, Sarah seemed different, harder, more resolved. James, do you know anyone who handles this kind of thing? She asked abruptly over her salad. What kind of thing? I want to know where he goes. Who he sees. If he's cheating, I need concrete evidence. James paused, taking a sip of his water. This was the pivot point. He could use this to destroy Robert, or he could help Sarah find her freedom. Luckily, the two paths were currently headed in the same direction. I have a friend, James said finally. He's a private investigator. Used to be a detective with the BPD. He's good, but he's not cheap. Money is not an issue, she replied, her voice turning steel cold. I have my own savings. I just need to know. A few days later, James drove Sarah to a nondescript brick building in South Boston to meet his contact, Will Higgins. Will's office was small, smelling faintly of stale coffee and old paper, but the man himself was sharp, a retired BPD detective with silver at his temples and eyes that did not miss a thing. James. Been a minute, Will said, standing up to shake his hand firmly. Will, this is Sarah, James introduced her. She needs your expertise. Will nodded, gesturing for her to take the worn leather client chair. Walk me through it, he said, opening a fresh notebook. Sarah started talking, her voice initially tight. She described Robert's emotional distance, the flimsy excuses that did not add up, the late nights at the office, and the phone calls he took in the other room. I can start surveillance as early as tomorrow, Will said, jotting down notes in shorthand. I just need a list of his usual haunts and his schedule. He keeps saying he's pulling all-nighters for the quarterly review, but my gut tells me he's lying, Sarah admitted, twisting her wedding ring. James stayed silent, watching her from the corner of the room. He could see the toll this was taking on her, the physical weight of the suspicion. A week passed. Sarah looked burned out, dark circles under her eyes visible even through her concealer. James tried to get her out of her head by suggesting a walk through the Boston Public Garden during lunch. Will emailed me the preliminary report, she said abruptly, stopping near the frozen lagoon. And? He tailed Robert for 3 days. And you know what? Her voice trembled, cracking against the cold wind. He's seeing someone. He's not working late. He's meeting a woman. James tensed, bracing himself. Do you know who she is? Not yet. Will said he needs a little more time to get a positive ID. She clenched her hands into fists inside her coat pockets, staring out at the gray water. I do not know how I am going to handle this, James. He stepped closer, placing a steady hand on her shoulder. You'll handle it because you re-strong, Sarah. And I am not going anywhere. She turned to him, her eyes swimming with tears. Thank you, James. I do not know what I'd do without you right now. A few days later, Will met them at a quiet coffee shop in the Seaport district with the final piece of the puzzle. Her name is Jessica Wilson, Will said, sliding a photo across the table and looking directly at James. Sarah frowned, staring at the name written on the file. Why does that name sound so familiar? James closed his eyes for a second, exhaling sharply. It was time. Because she's my ex-wife, he confessed. Sarah froze, her gaze snapping up to his face. Your ex-wife? Yes, James said, locking eyes with her. She's the reason I knew who Robert was in the first place. She left me for him. Sarah looked like she'd been slapped. She recoiled slightly in her chair. Why did not you tell me? I did not know how, he answered honestly. I wanted you to find the truth on your own terms, without me biasing the evidence. She stood up, backing away from the table, shaking her head. This is too much. James stood up too, desperate to keep her from running. Sarah, please. I did not want this to feel like a manipulation. She spun around, her eyes flashing with a mix of hurt and anger. Then what is it, James? Did you seek me out? Did you use me to get back at them? In the beginning, yes, he said, lowering his voice. But then everything shifted. How? She demanded. Because I fell for you, Sarah. She stood there, stunned, processing the confession, before turning and walking out the door without another word. Sarah stood by the window of her Back Bay condo, watching the rain slick the asphalt of Commonwealth Avenue below. It had been 2 days since James dropped the bomb, and her mind was still a chaotic mess. She wanted to hate him, to cut him out completely, but every time she closed her eyes, she remembered his voice, his steady presence, and the raw pain in his confession. On her kitchen island lay the manila envelope Will had given her. Photos of Robert and Jessica entering a boutique hotel in Cambridge stared back at her, undeniable proof. Her husband was cheating on her. Worse, he had been lying to her face for months with zero remorse. Her iPhone buzzed on the counter, startling her. James Wilson. She reached for it to decline the call, but her finger hovered. After a long pause, she swiped to answer. "Hello," she said, her voice dry and guarded. "Sarah," his tone was cautious, like he was walking through a minefield. "I know I am the last person you want to talk to. I just needed to make sure you're okay." She stayed silent for a moment, listening to his breathing on the other end. I do not know. This is a lot to process." "I get it," James said softly. "Look, if you're willing, I'd like to see you. You can scream at me, you can ask questions, or I can just listen. Totally your call." Her heart told her she needed him. Her brain told her to run. "Okay," she agreed, surprising herself. "Tomorrow. The public garden, by the bridge. 3 p.m. "I'll be there," James said, the relief audible in his voice. The next afternoon, Sarah walked toward the bridge, the wind whipping her hair across her face. She spotted James from a distance. He was leaning against the railing, looking out over the water, looking like a man carrying the weight of the world. "Hey," she said, approaching him. He turned, and a tentative, weak smile broke through his anxious expression. "I am glad you came." "Me too," she admitted quietly, sitting down on a nearby bench. James sat next to her, careful to leave a foot of space between them. "You know," she started, staring at a passing swan boat, "I have no idea how to navigate my life right now." "I want to help you, Sarah," he said, his voice earnest. "But I know I broke your trust." She turned to face him, her expression pained. "You're right. It's complicated. But I see not deny that you've been the only person in my corner through this entire nightmare. I do not expect you to forgive me for how this started," he said, looking her in the eye. "But I am not here for revenge anymore. I am done with that." She sighed, searching his face for the truth. "Then what are you here for?" "For you," James said simply. Sarah looked down, blinking back tears. "I do not know what to do next," she whispered. James reached out as if to touch her hand, then pulled back, respecting her boundaries. "Start with yourself. You deserve the truth, and you have it now. Decide what kind of life you want to live, and then go get it." She nodded, and they sat in silence for a long time, the city noise fading into the background. That evening, Sarah returned to her condo, her resolve hardened like steel. She was not going to wait anymore. When Robert walked through the door, throwing his keys into the bowl, her heart hammered against her ribs, but she did not flinch. "Robert," she said, standing in the entryway. "What?" he muttered, shrugging off his coat, barely looking at her. "We need to talk." "Not now, Sarah. I am beat. Long day at the site." "Now," she said, her voice dropping an octave, becoming razor sharp. "Tell me the truth. Are you cheating on me?" Robert froze. His expression shifted from annoyance to guardedness in a split second. "Are you serious?" he scoffed, forcing a laugh. "Dead serious. And I know you lying," she said, her hands trembling slightly, but her gaze unwavering. "What kind of paranoid crap have you been reading?" Robert snapped, his voice rising. "You acting crazy." Sarah reached onto the console table and picked up the envelope, extending it toward him. "Is this crazy?" He snatched the papers, flipped through the photos, and his face drained of color. He looked up, a sneer replacing his shock. "You hired a PI? Jesus, Sarah, you. Did you cheat on me?" She cut him off. Robert threw the photos onto the floor, scattering them. "So what if I did? Huh? What are you gonna do about it? Leave?" He stepped closer, trying to use his height to intimidate her. "You would not last a month in this city without my paycheck. You have nothing without me." The words hit her like a physical blow, but instead of breaking her, they ignited a fire. You do not get to talk to me like that anymore, Robert, she said, her voice steady and cold. I deserve better than a liar and a narcissist. He huffed, pushed past her toward the bedroom, and tossed over his shoulder, do whatever the hell you want. The next morning, Sarah met James at a tat bakery in Beacon Hill. It's over, she said, taking a sip of her latte. You sure? He asked. 100%. I am filing for divorce. I know a shark, James said immediately. Best family law attorney in Boston. Will you help me? Always. Those next few days marked the turning point for Sarah. With James helping her navigate the logistics, she formulated an exit strategy designed to minimize collateral damage. She reached out to Charlotte Banks, a high-powered family law attorney James had vouched for. Charlotte sat behind a mahogany desk in her office overlooking Boston Harbor, exuding the kind of confidence that cost $500 an hour. She listened intently to Sarah, her expression unreadable. We can handle this, Charlotte said, closing her notebook. But you need to be made of steel for the next few weeks. I am ready, Sarah answered. Sarah sat in the leather chair, clutching a folder containing the debris of her marriage, financial statements, printouts, and Will S. surveillance photos. Her hands trembled slightly, but her eyes were steady. James had opted to wait in the reception area, giving her the space to handle this herself. Are you sure? Charlotte asked, studying Sarah's face. Yes, Sarah replied, her voice firm. I just want this to be over. Charlotte nodded and leaned forward to outline the game plan. We have two routes, a negotiated settlement agreement or a contested divorce in court. Given that Robert has been indiscreet, we have significant leverage. But there is a risk he'll try to play dirty. Are you prepared for that? Sarah took a deep breath. I am. I just want him out of my life. I do not want him controlling my narrative anymore. Good. Step 1. We file the complaint for divorce. A process server will hand him the papers in a few days. If he decides to fight, we have enough evidence to bury him in discovery. But brace yourself for the backlash. Sarah nodded. For the first time in months, she felt like the pilot of her own life, not just a passenger. A few days later, the bomb dropped. Robert was served at his office. His reaction was immediate and explosive. He called Sarah while she was commuting home on the T, not waiting for her to even pick up before he started screaming. What the hell is this? He bellowed into the phone. You filed for divorce? You do not get to do this without my permission. Sarah held the phone away from her ear, wincing at the volume. I have every right to do this, Robert. You broke our vows. I am done. You've lost your mind. His voice shook with rage. You will not get a dime. You have no proof of anything. Sarah let out a cold, humorless laugh. I have everything I need, she said, and tapped the end call button. That evening, James met her outside her building. She looked drained, but the fire in her eyes had not gone out. How are you holding up? He asked, walking her toward his Audi to take her to dinner. Better than I thought, she admitted, clicking her seatbelt. Though my ears are still ringing from the screaming. You'll get through it, James said, resting his hand briefly on the steering wheel before driving off. This is just the first wave. Sarah looked at him, gratitude washing over her. You know, James, if it were not for you, I probably would have stayed in that nightmare. He offered a small smile, but his expression remained serious. You made the choice, Sarah. I am just riding shotgun. The next day, Charlotte summoned Sarah and James to her office to discuss the next move. She spread the surveillance photos and text logs on the conference table. This is our leverage, Charlotte said clinically. But before we scorch the earth, I want to try to settle. Robert is a narcissist. He cares about his image. He knows a public trial involving adultery would be expensive and embarrassing. So what is the offer? Sarah asked. We offer a clean break. You waive your claim to his future earnings and the retirement accounts, but he assumes 100% of the marital debt, the credit cards, the car loans. It's a fair trade-off to keep these photos out of the public record. James leaned forward, studying the picture of Robert and Jessica. And if he refuses? Then we go to court, Charlotte said, her voice hard. And we win. Meanwhile, Robert was not sitting idle. He frantically reached out to Jessica, desperate to stop the bleeding. They met at a dive bar in Southie, far away from the financial district crowd. "You realize this is all because of your ex?" Robert spat, glaring at her over his beer. "James set this whole thing up." Jessica scoffed, taking a sip of her cosmopolitan. "You did this to yourself, Robert. Do not blame James for your sloppy behavior." "You not helping," he hissed. "If Sarah takes this to court, she'll ruin me." "And what exactly do you want me to do?" Jessica asked coldly. "I already lost everything in my divorce. Do not think for a second I am going to fall on a grenade for you." Robert grimaced, the realization sinking in that he was truly on his own. A week later, the parties met for a settlement conference. Sarah, James, and Charlotte sat on one side of a long glass table. Robert and his attorney sat on the other. The air in the room was toxic. "My client is willing to review the proposal," Robert's lawyer began, posturing. Charlotte cut him off. "No," she said. "We are not here to negotiate terms. We re-dictating them. You have two options: sign the agreement as written, or we see you in court on Monday." "This is blackmail," Robert shouted, standing up. "It's justice," Sarah said, speaking up for the first time. Her voice was steady. "You destroyed our marriage. Now you pay the bill." Robert shot her a venomous look, but Charlotte slid a pen across the table. "You have 5 minutes," she said, checking her Rolex. "Or we walk." After a tense silence and a whispered argument with his lawyer, Robert snatched the pen and signed the papers. That evening, James and Sarah went to a quiet Italian restaurant in the North End to celebrate. The relief was palpable. "Thank you, James. I could not have done this without you. You earned this, Sarah. You free. And you know," she added, leaning in slightly over the candlelit table, "I think I am ready to start something new." James smiled, his eyes lighting up. "Then let us start with dinner." New Year's Eve descended on Boston with a fresh coat of snow, muffling the city sounds. Sarah and James were in his living room, taping up the last few boxes of her belongings. Her divorce had been finalized weeks ago, and she was moving into a new place, but tonight, she was at James's condo. "Are you sure you want to go to this gala?" James asked, sealing a box of books. "Everyone will be there. Colleagues, people who talk." Sarah chuckled, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "That is exactly why I want to go. I am done hiding. Let them see that I am doing just fine." "You stronger than you give yourself credit for," he said, looking at her with admiration. She looked up, meeting his gaze. "And you, James, helped me remember who I used to be." The New Year's Eve gala had drawn out the city's entire social elite: venture capitalists, partners from the top law firms, federal judges, and the trophy spouses that accompanied them. The ballroom was transformed into a shimmering landscape of silver and gold, vibrating with the hum of expensive conversation and jazz. When James and Sarah walked in arm, the energy in the room seemed to shift toward them. Sarah's crimson gown was a showstopper, hugging her figure perfectly, with a high slit that offered glimpses of her sculpted legs with every step. It drew envious glances from the women and undisguised appreciation from the men. James, looking formidable in a bespoke black tuxedo, guided her through the crowd with quiet confidence. "Are you sure you're ready for the spotlight?" he whispered, leaning close to her ear. Sarah squeezed his arm gently. "I can handle anything. As long as I am with you." As the evening progressed, the couple remained the center of gravity. They eventually made their way to a table near the orchestra, where Charlotte Banks was seated with her husband, the Honorable Judge Hawk. "Sarah." "James," Charlotte exclaimed, standing up to embrace her former client. "You two look absolutely stunning." "Thank you, Charlotte. And thank you, for everything." "I would not be here without you," Sarah said, her voice filled with genuine warmth. "I just did my job, but seeing you like this? That's the real payoff," the attorney replied, smiling. Judge Hawk extended a hand to James, shaking it firmly. "Now it's your turn to look out for her, son." James offered a respectful nod and a grin. "I intend to do exactly that, Judge." Meanwhile, at a dimly lit table in the back corner, Robert sat with Jessica. The tension between them was thick enough to cut with a knife. Robert was clearly several drinks deep, his face flushed and sullen, while Jessica nervously shredded a cocktail napkin. They had clocked Sarah and James the moment they walked in, and the sight had soured the night completely. "Is this some kind of sick joke?" Robert muttered, glaring across the room at the happy couple. Him. He was the architect of this whole thing. Jessica scoffed, taking a sip of her wine. "Maybe you should look in the mirror, Robert. You drove us into this ditch. If you had not been so sloppy, we would not be sitting here like pariahs." "So what? Now she gets the fairy tale ending, and I am left drowning in debt with no future?" Robert grumbled, gripping his scotch glass until his knuckles turned white. "Stop whining," Jessica snapped. "If you do not want them to see you imploding, pull yourself together." But Robert was past the point of restraint. Later, as James and Sarah stood at the marble-topped bar waiting for a round of champagne, Robert approached them. His tie was crooked, and his steps were heavy and uneven. "You," he spat out, pointing a shaking finger at James. "You think you won, do not you? You think you just walk away with everything?" Sarah tensed, her posture stiffening, but James did not flinch. He turned slowly, his expression bored. "Robert. You should go back to your table," James said, his voice dropping to a chill temperature. "No. I want to know how you pulled it off. This was all your game, was not it?" Robert's voice was rising, teetering on the edge of a scene. "If you looking for a villain," Sarah interrupted, stepping forward and blocking his line of sight to James, "look in the mirror. Everything that happened is a direct result of your choices, Robert. Nobody else's." "Shut up," Robert shouted, his voice cracking. Heads began to turn. The ambient chatter near the bar died down. James stepped smoothly between them, his eyes hard as steel. "This is our night, Robert. You've already lost enough. Do not make me call security and have you dragged out of here." Robert froze for a heartbeat, his eyes darting around at the onlookers. The shame finally penetrated the alcohol fog. He muttered something unintelligible, waved a dismissive hand, and stumbled back toward the shadows. Sarah looked up at James, her eyes shining with relief and gratitude. "Thank you," she whispered. "Always," he replied, interlacing his fingers with hers. When the clock struck midnight, the ballroom erupted in cheers, noisemakers, and the clinking of crystal flutes. Confetti rained down from the ceiling. Sarah turned to James, her face glowing in the strobe lights. "You made this year better than I ever could have imagined," she said. "And you made me a better man," he answered, leaning down. Their kiss, amidst the roar of the countdown and the fireworks, felt like a seal on a new contract, one written not on paper, but on shared resilience. After the midnight rush, as the crowd began to thin out and the valet line grew long, Sarah took James's hand and led him toward the back of the room. Robert and Jessica were sitting in silence, looking like strangers sharing a table. "Robert," Sarah said, her voice even and calm. He looked up, startled, saying nothing. "I want you to know something. I forgive you. But I am not doing it for you. I am doing it for me." Robert opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. "And Jessica," James added, looking at his ex-wife with a sense of finality. "I hope you find whatever it is you've been chasing." Jessica simply nodded, unable to meet his gaze. James and Sarah turned around and walked away, leaving the heavy baggage of the past at that table, untouched. That night, lying in bed next to James, the city lights casting soft shadows across the room, Sarah whispered into the darkness, "I am finally free." James pulled her closer, his arm a protective weight over her. "You always were," he murmured. Her smile was soft, full of peace. And from that moment on, they began to write a new story, one without lies, without revenge, built only on trust and love. And that concludes our story today. Thank you for watching to the end. If you liked it, please give it a like and leave a comment. Also, we are always happy to discuss any comments you may have. See you in the next video.